Hello and welcome to episode 227 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking quite a bit of Kenny. It's been a while. We talked about him a lot earlier in the season, but it appears that a Kenny comeback might be on the horizon in the CDL. And we have just a ton of roster mania. Not a ton of confirmations, but certainly rumors and reports to talk about. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Kind of like you said, it's kind of in that weird spot right now where we've gotten some reports for teams. I mean, actually, one of the teams that you would probably expect to wait a bit for confirmation and stuff did confirm at least one player, so we know that for sure. But it seemingly feels like we're gonna be in the dark for a little longer, especially with these teams doing trials and stuff. And it's in typical Ego Chow fashion, it'll probably come down to the wire next week, and then once we do our next show, all the confirmations will come immediately after that. So we're gonna have to just wait and see how things play out. But for now, we can at least talk about everything that's been reported and what could happen and go from there.
Yeah, we're doing this on Thursday afternoon. Typically, we do them on Wednesday, but since we're not doing a show this weekend, and it just made a little more sense to push it back a day, see if things popped up and were confirmed. Of course, yesterday was like the first day where there wasn't actually any news that popped up, which is very concerning for everybody. Just in the CDL and especially for the two of us. But yeah, I think we have to start with Kenny because he's been obviously he's multiple time world champion, one of the best players of all time, and he's been out of the CDL for a few months now after being released by the Los Angeles Thieves. Of course, he started the season with LAT. It did not go super well. The roster rumors basically circled him from the moment that he got on the team, because I remember talking when he was signed that was a weird signing, and that he would obviously have to prove himself. And unfortunately for him, that didn't come to be, and he ended up getting released and replaced by Neum before the Major 2 qualifiers. And he's been out for a bit now, and it seems like he's interested in coming back in. First, I think we just have to mention that he was linked to the Boston Breach, which I mean, it didn't come out of nowhere, but it just seemed very odd, of course, because, I mean, Boston is one of the worst teams. I figured that if he was going to get back in, it felt like maybe a bigger step up, but maybe that was just about as high as he could go until we got the report on Tuesday that Kenny will actually be trialing with the Carolina Royal Ravens. And we snuck it in at the very end of last episode, but Fire 40, who was formerly in the CDL, he's also going to be trialing. And now we know that also Geo might be trialing with Carolina as well. So a lot of things that might be happening, could be happening. I want to get your thoughts first, though, on Kenny, the previous link to Boston, and now this reported trial with the Carolina Royal Ravens.
Yeah, so on the Royal Ravens front, at least, I think somebody pointed it out on Twitter. I don't think I linked it, but regardless, I'm pretty sure it was last year. Um, Geez, all these like teams are like melting together in my mind, but I'm pretty sure it was last year. Um, if not in one of the recent years, Kenny had an opportunity to go to Carolina. No, it would have been last year, yeah, because he ended up going to Minnesota instead. But there was like the reports that Kenny was going to go to Carolina, and then it kind of fell through, and that led to him going to Minnesota, if I remember correctly. So
Yeah.
it's there's been an interest in the past, even despite assuming it was last year and I'm remembering correctly, like he was struggling early last year. There was still interest there from Carolina. And then the same case this year, like he had his issues early on this year and there's still interest there. So that, I mean, hey, that's a good thing for Kenny at least. Will be interesting to see how it works out. I did see some screenshots yesterday of Carolina trialing with Kenny, and they lost the series to the Bush 6-3. Um, so I don't know how much the trials will um, impact any decisions or like how the results of the maps will be weighed versus the individual performances in these trials. But regardless, I think it's interesting that Kenny is being linked to multiple teams in this roster mania period. I think I admittedly was somewhat kind of excited about the whole Boston situation with him reportedly temporarily being considered as an SMG, and that was literally just a couple hours after we finished recording the last episode. Um, so I was actually like I mean you hear a lot of, or not even here, but like you see it a lot in Call of Duty esports in recent years, where a notable SMG player slowly transitions into becoming a flex or an AR player. You rarely see a player, even though obviously Kenny had historic success on the SMG early on in his career once he turned 18 and came back in the TK days. You rarely see a player go from an AR to an SMG. That doesn't happen very often. So I was admittedly very curious to see how that would work out if that happened. Obviously, it doesn't seem like that's no longer in play for Boston, but it was for a couple hours and a couple days there. It was something that definitely had me excited and just interested to see how it would play out. But regardless, I think the big thing right now with Kenny, and regardless of what people think of him and his performance and all that stuff, is at least in theory, these teams that he's linked to right now and stuff, it is not like he is going to get some mega contract from these teams. At least in theory, it wouldn't make a ton of sense if these teams like Boston and Carolina are throwing a massive bag at him, right? So he is seemingly, from the outside looking in, it feels like he is coming back out of passion and the desire to compete, and it's not an I mean, maybe it's an attempt to, just have a short-term job at least in that sense. But in terms of the actual like salary and what he's probably been used to getting on a salary base over recent years versus what is likely being offered for the rest of this season, in theory, I would be very surprised if it was anything, you know, super lucrative. And that makes me think that this could be something that Kenny is viewing this as potentially one of his last opportunities to compete, and he's doing it because he truly wants to compete. And he could probably very comfortably continue to do his watch party and his streams on with Breaking Point and all that stuff. And you know if the fact that he is seemingly being put back in a position here to be involved in these roster mania conversations makes me think that maybe there's a shot that we see like a little rejuvenation on the passion front, and maybe this is like it feels like this has to be one of his last opportunities, regardless of whether he gets on a team or with the trials and whatnot. But he's given it a shot at least, and like I said, from a contract standpoint, I would be very surprised if this was anything like super lucrative for him, and that makes me think this is purely just passion based, the desire to compete, etc. And that is something that for me at least it sticks out, because you hear all about all these other times where players are just like trying to get the bag, or just trying to stick around and sign whatever contract they can. But in this case, it feels like Kenny could be doing it just to show one last time what he's capable of.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that he, even if he doesn't play particularly well or as obviously as well as he used to, which I don't think is necessarily possible anymore, then he could have like a solid or respectable end to his career with Carolina, whereas it probably was never going to happen on like a high performing team like LAT. It's just there's so many expectations that are placed upon you, and if he underperforms relative to like his MVP caliber teammates, then it's always going to look bad. But if he's playing with a lot of rookies and guys that are still trying to find their way in the CDL, and they're Carolina, I'm sure would probably Of course, every team wants to win championships and all that, but I'm sure that they would be relatively satisfied with just getting to champs and making it to the end of the season and not, being left out at the end of the year tournament. So, yeah, he's. I think this is probably, if not the last time, one of the last times that he could get a CDL spot. And of course, we don't even know if he will end up on the Carolina Royal Ravens because, like I said, Fire and Gio were previously reported to have been also trialing with Carolina. Nero released. We talked about that on the last episode. But I think it's interesting because, all the stuff that we've been talking about, we should credit Ronnie Intel of Breaking Point because he did a great job. But I think it's very interesting the last part of the article where he was reporting about Geo and Fire, or I guess more so Geo, were trialing. He said that interestingly, the core of the Ravens roster expressed a desire to bring Gio on board during the offseason, but sources indicate that main AR Austin Slasher Liticote preferred Nero for the role at the time. Of course, Nero released now. Slasher retired before the CDL returned in early January. So I just think that's something to note. And we should also mention that Gio and Kenny played together on Minnesota last year. So there is a connection there. I don't know if that'll be, if Carolina would be open to making, a two-person change and bringing in both of them, or if it's just they're all competing for one spot. But yeah, that's very interesting. Obviously, we don't typically get that kind of that information where there was seemingly a split in what the players actually wanted in this team. And we talked about Gio quite a bit over the offseason and how his reputation had not been stellar, I would say. Obviously JCap pretty memorably called him a kill whore and said that he doesn't play smart, he doesn't play for the team. And, his stats are good and all that, but I don't know. I feel like it might be time for him to get another shot. He's been in challengers this season. I was surprised that he wasn't on a CDL team, to be truthful, to start the season, when I think some lesser players or players that I just don't think have like long-term potential found a CDL home. But that's why maybe I'm not a GM and why some other people are.
Feels like, at least for me from the outside looking in, because I've also talked a bunch about Gio. I know we both have, but I still really do think there is value in what he could bring to a team. It feels like to me the comparison that immediately jumps out is Brack, and it feels like both of them are viewed as two players who they can get you a bunch of kills, but maybe from a play style perspective, there are going to be potential clashes if they don't have the right pieces alongside them. And, ironically, Brack is another name that's also being mentioned in this whole trial situation with other teams and whatnot. But I think there are a lot of people who are deserving of another opportunity in the CDL to showcase what they can do, especially some players who have seen success in challengers this year in particular. And I think that's one downside to the Kenny aspect of this stuff is, like, you got names like Fire and Geo who are um been on the outside looking in of the CDL for a bit now, and then a former world champion, arguably a top 15 Call of Duty player of all time, is just like, yeah, I'm going to give it another shot. And obviously a team is gonna, if they're even remotely interested, they're gonna give that guy a shot just based on the pedigree and what he's done in the past. So definitely interested to see how the trials shake out and what, ultimately ends up happening there with the Royal Ravens. Because if ironically, if they do go with Kenny, it will be a little similar to that Minnesota team last year in my eyes, just in terms of like Kenny trying to go into a team with three existing guys. And obviously Lurks has been playing very, very well in my opinion for Carolina, but Traixx and Exceed and Nero were really, at least recently, a part of that like inconsistency where like I know right off the bat for Exceed there have been like overloads where he's gone like 8 and 20 or something very negative, and then there are other hard points where he's right at the top behind Lurks. So um it would at least be somewhat comparable to the Minnesota situation last year, in my eyes at least, with Kenny joining that team, and that was a team Gio was on too. So, lots of you know interesting tidbits here, really, with this situation. But we'll have to wait and see how it all becomes finalized.
Definitely not a team that I would want to repeat because they lost a shit ton of game fives and then they ended up missing champs anyway. So if that's the path that Carolina is on, then maybe they should not get on that path. But we have to pivot to Boston because this is obviously connected to the Kenny stuff. Ronnie Intel said that after strong negotiations, a deal could not be agreed upon between Kenny and Boston. And as a result, the Breach have reportedly stuck with Purj. So we talked previously, maybe a few episodes ago now, that Boston had benched both Snoopy and Purj, and it looked like they were going to replace both of their SMG players, which is pretty much unheard of in like especially mid-season for teams. Snoopy has officially been released, which I think is interesting. I didn't really expect that. I expected him to just stick on the bench, even if he didn't play anymore in the CDL. But he's been officially released, and now it seems like Purj is actually going to remain on the roster, and in place of Snoopy, Afro has been officially signed and announced by the Boston Breach. So,
Yay.
I don't know how to feel about this because obviously I'm still like a Snoopy defender, a Snoopy truther, you might say, and I believe maybe kind of similar to Gio because there obviously been a lot of conversations about how smart Snoopy is in game or how connected he is, or kind of just like how much he's actually paying attention to the finer details. But I still believe that he has a lot of potential, and I think it's sometimes easier to teach a very like mechanically talented player how to play smart versus a smart player teach them how to play like very well and to shoot straight. If that makes any sense. It feels like it might be easier to teach Snoopy how to be an intelligent player who's locked in and has kind of like this game IQ that he seemingly is missing. Whereas Purj has been one of the more underperforming players of this season. It's kind of surprising that he's back on this roster, considering like especially because Afro's coming in, and we've seen Afro the last few years, even this year, he's not been like a real needle mover, and I don't know how much this actually changes for Boston. I think if they had replaced Purj with another SMG, I don't know exactly who that would have been. Maybe it would have it really I don't know who they could have brought in here. Probably more of a challengers player in all honesty. But this just doesn't seem like a big move. What do you think about all this stuff with Boston?
Yeah, I'm definitely not like super sold on them keeping Purj around. It felt like they being Boston were officially like turning the page on this previous roster and just fully going all in on Nasty seemingly, and we've kind of talked about that for a lot of episodes over the past couple months, like Nasty being the best player on Boston, and it felt like if they got rid of Cammy previously, brought in Spart. Now, if they were to actually get rid of Snoopy and Purj, it would literally just be Nasty plus whoever, and they'd be building around him. Which when the alternative was us talking about them selling Nasty to another team and then building around the others, like I guess from that perspective, it makes sense. Like you, I was very surprised that Snoopy is officially released. I feel like before all this information came out, if you told me after we reported that Snoopy and Purj were both being benched, that one of them was going to come back into the lineup after that initial report, I would have guessed it would have been Snoopy and not Purj. So this is like completely he's just done with Boston right now, and that's just like that hasn't been the case over recent years. It felt like he was the face of the franchise, for lack of a better term, and now Boston is just moving on from him completely. So on the Snoopy front, I'm definitely interested to see where he lands in challengers. how he performs in challengers, because that was a big talking point when there was the whole like Snoopy versus Slasher thing, like Slasher feeling like Snoopy needed more time in challengers and stuff. And I remember the Boston versus Cloud9 match in these latest qualifiers, the Major 2 qualifiers. Snoopy was going off against those Cloud9 guys, and I remember putting in the notes like, this shows what Snoopy would do against challengers, because the Cloud9 guys were challengers guys at that time. Um, so I'm interested to see how it works out for Snoopy and how that all goes, but that's, down the road at this point. Just in terms of Boston, I think with Afro, I still like Afro as a player. Obviously, things didn't work out early this year, but he was one of these guys that we were talking about in a similar vein to, uh, maybe not the exact situation as like but Geo in particular, but more along the lines of like Brack and Fire, these guys who have gotten CDL chances in the past, but it's been a couple years, and I was from that perspective, I was kind of disappointed with the way things worked out for Afro on Cloud9, just because it felt like Afro was really doing his thing in challengers over these past couple seasons. He finally got an early season opportunity on a CDL team, uh, given his like UK status and the visas and all that stuff. He finally got an early chance and then was just kicked to the curb very early. So I am definitely interested to see how he performs in this opportunity, because this is another, like we talk about, like, especially because of the whole visa situation and things like that. If he doesn't show up on this Boston team, he could find himself back in challengers again next year, and then who knows if he gets another CDL opportunity after this. So, um, I definitely believe that Afro has the potential to be a solid CDL player. It, like you said, it just hasn't really manifested into that since like basically his first like major pop off when he first burst onto the scene. But one common denominator there would be that I'm pretty sure he played with Nasty when he first came in, and if it wasn't like with Nasty, then he was they had to play together at some point. I said it last episode and I didn't look it up, but I'm very confident in that. So, um, yeah, I think I'm just not sold on the Purj situation and him coming back in the lineup, but I do think, Spart is like kind of an underappreciated aspect of this team, just because he played really well in challengers this year in particular, and then clearly came into a broken Boston team. So, getting some fresh faces there for him, I would have been a fan of. Now it turns out it's only just going to be the one fresh face in Afro, but we'll have to see how it works out.
I think this is just delaying the inevitable for Boston. Afro, we talked about it, I think, on the last episode. This is one of his last chances. It has to be. He's been on half of the CDL teams at this point, and while he was very promising early on in his career, it's not been very good the last few years. You just have to look at how many teams he's been on, and every time that he gets signed, it feels like, okay, he's getting a shot, maybe let's see if he's able to pull it off, and it just hasn't worked out. And that happens to most CDL players, in all honesty, so it's not a shot at him by any means, but again, he's not a game changer in this roster, especially because Nasty and Spart have been good. They've been solid. They are the two players that Boston is understandably trying to build around, but bringing in Afro and not getting rid of Purj, it just feels like they don't really want to commit to the move that they really need to make, and that's just like wiping out half the team. I think bringing in ReeaL would have been interesting. We talked about that a little bit as one of the SMG players, and letting him play on the role that he obviously wanted to play, and he did play to start the season with Toronto, and then he got moved off very briefly before he got benched and released. So I would have liked to see ReeaL in this team. I don't know who the other submachine gun player would have been most likely. It's not an easy decision regardless, but I don't think Afro is the player. I would have preferred Boston to kind of take a little more of a risk on like a maybe more of an unproven or more unseen challengers player to just see if that could work out. I don't know. I mean, Bush has basically been rated 1,000 times over, but maybe just keep going to the well, even though the last time that they had negotiations, apparently it wasn't super pleasant for Bush. But and I also looked at just like Omit Brooklyn, like currently on at least Gamepedia, Omit only has 2 players on their roster right now. It's Asim and Brack, and we've been, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but Brack might be on his way out. We don't know for sure. So maybe that's a landing spot for Snoopy as well. He could just go to Omit Brooklyn, which is weird, obviously, because Omit is operating Boston on a day-to-day basis. What was that?
I was gonna say that you reminded me there was a clip from Zuma's stream where apparently like that omit situation isn't as like solidified as initially reported, and it might not come to fruition now. So I might have to do some digging here and try and find that. But it was Zuma saying that like he talked to Rafi, and Rafi was like kind of pissed off about the report on the omit stuff because then it's like not like actually close to happening. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. Allegedly, purportedly.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, if that is the case, and Omit isn't running Boston, then it would make sense for a lot of these moves to happen because we had said like, hey, if Omit is like taking and calling the shots or whatever, then why wouldn't they bring up some of their guys, give them a shot in the CDL, put them on Boston? But they haven't done that, obviously. So who knows? But yeah, I don't think that this roster will work out for Boston. They just need a lot of help. Like they are, I believe, in 11th place in the CDL, maybe 10th place. I can't remember offhand, but they're obviously one of the worst teams in the league. And that's despite having 2 pretty good players on their roster, which is very concerning if I'm Boston. It's kind of crazy to think about. Like Nasty is probably, if he was a free agent, he would be swarmed by a number of teams, like including top teams that might look for an upgraded AR. I think if Spart were a complete free agent right now, considering what he's been able to show in the Major 2 qualifiers, he might also get quite a bit of interest from some CDL teams. And yet they're, one of the worst teams. They didn't even get to Major 2. They didn't even get to play their one match that they probably would have played in the play-in. So yeah, things are not looking great for Boston. I don't think that they're necessarily going to turn around with this roster change, but time, I guess, will tell. I want to talk real quick about Vancouver because we discussed it a little bit on the last episode, I believe, or maybe 2 episodes ago now, that Brack and Beans had been kind of considered for the roster spot that they left open, and now it seems like Beans is not going to be a part of Vancouver, but Nero, who was recently released by Carolina, could be. And Ronnie Intel reported earlier this week that Vancouver is trialing both Brack and Nero for their spot, and that obviously left open by Capitol's release. And we also said that there was a chance that Gwen could get moved to the SMG spot in more of a comfortable role for him in this release. So I kind of said it before with the Bean stuff. I don't view him. I kind of view him the same. Like if you're going to replace, I guess, Capsule with Beans, I'm just kind of baffled by that decision. I mean, it's not as baffling with Nero, but he hasn't performed well or as well as you might expect or want him in Carolina. And the same remains for Brack. Obviously, we haven't seen him in the CDL for so long, so it's very hard to even know what he would be able to contribute. So what do you think about Nero or Brack in place of Capsule for the Surge?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back and look. And I'm not seeing Nero with Gwen, so I guess that makes sense. But Nero did play with TJ on Boston at one point, so that's what I was trying to. There were so many of those Boston rosters, I wasn't sure if they actually teamed together, but they did, so that could be part of the connection there. But regardless, I think I definitely am more of a proponent in this situation to hopefully see Brack get the spot and get his shot at another opportunity in the CDL. Nothing against Nero because I still uh, really truly do like him as a player, but I also think that the big thing here is that seemingly it's a trial for an AR spot, and that was one of the things we talked about last time on the show is that I was kind of interested in seeing Nero go down to challengers and get back to his SMG roots and not be this sort of flex AR player because I think he's seen his most success is that uber aggressive SMG who's first in and gets the ball rolling for a team in respawn. So I think if Vancouver is going with this whole like, go into SMG situation and they want an AR, it makes more sense for me to get someone like Brack and like Geo. I know we talked about them, but they are AR players. You know what you're getting from them as opposed to Nero, who's seemingly like in between this potential transition of and am I an SMG player, am I a flex, am I an AR, all this yada yada. Um, so yeah, I'm hopeful on this front that Brack gets an opportunity. I don't know how much it'll really change things for Vancouver and their outlook, but I guess we'll still have to wait and see. It's another situation here where we just got reports of trials and nothing much more to go on.
Yeah, another one is Falcons. We talked about it on the last episode, but QK is reportedly being tested for one of the spots. It just depends on who his three teammates are going to be. It seems like it's very weird. I was thinking about this, but like, how do you move forward as a team after this? Where if you're Pred or Exnid, who are being considered, both are being considered to be benched in place of QK, if you get kept in the roster after QK comes in and you survive essentially, how does that kind of play on your mental state when you're like, I know that I'm on the chopping block and I know that, I was very close to being benched, but what do you think about all that? That like they have to move forward even if they stay in this roster.
This is a really, really weird situation, and I was watching Method stream and Zuma's stream when they were, going back and forth on this, and I think a lot of people have the mindset that you can't give up on Pred, and you like Methods was essentially saying, paraphrasing here, that like there are very few players in the current era who can just take over a series and win you a map on their own against some of these top teams. And Pred is one of those players who has that potential. Now the
Yeah.
question of it is whether we seen that from him directly this year or not. You probably argue we haven't really, but we've seen it in the past, and it's there if you can tap into it. Um, it also Benjay was the one saying that he believes this is potentially like a quote unquote scare tactic or like a like kind of trying to light a
Yeah.
fire under Pred's ass by like just saying like, hey, you're potentially on the chopping block, but then they're going to be like, we're paying this guy a shit ton of money. I mean, he's not really on the chopping block, but if we tell him he is, maybe he'll pick it up a little bit and try even harder than he potentially already is, and that could be an indirect way of uh, getting the ball rolling with this team because like I have been of this position since the preseason that I really just want to see Kismet being that frontline SMG and Pred running behind him, and I would be pretty upset if Pred was the player who was removed here and we never got to see what that SMG duo could potentially look like and how they would work. And it's just a weird situation because I've really been pretty vocal about how strong Exnid has played of late, and especially in these online qualifiers. But that seemingly the big question they were talking about the Falcons being really bad in S&D, which that they were all those guys on the stream. I think Octane was in there at 1.2. Talking about how communication could impact that, and then like if they are struggling in SNG with one Saudi player right now in Exnid on a communication standpoint, just bringing another player in QK who potentially has even uh, less experience communicating in English than Exnid, who has like slowly gotten more used to doing that over the past year. Um, that might, like, in theory, is another issue that could pop up with this potential move, but I don't know what's going to end up happening. It feels like to me, like a gut feeling is that it's going to be QK for Exnid, but I don't know how much that really changes for this team outside of allowing Kismet to get on that SMG. And then like they still got to show up and perform, and they're still like I obviously am completely ignorant to QK's situation and how effective he is at communicating in English, but I having a Saudi player replace a Saudi player on a team that is potentially already struggling in communication doesn't seem like a great way of addressing that possible issue. It's gonna come down, like, QK's been really good in challengers, but is it gonna be is his skill gonna be a big enough difference to impact the results versus what Exnid was bringing to the table when Exnid was playing like possibly arguably one of the best players on the team. The other way you can look at it though too is like bringing QK in and allowing
Yeah.
Kismet to go to a sub. Is that a big enough difference maker to uh, impact the team outside of all these other external factors? So there's a lot to consider here. Um, I really, this is a, I would just, I'm of the opinion too that, like the streamers were saying, I would be very shocked if Pred was the one uh, who's moved or benched in this situation, but crazier things have happened.
I just don't. I think like in most instances, you should always bank on the talent, and Pred has proven over a longer period of time that he is a more talented player than Exnid is, and who knows whether QK will be able to come into the CDL and have like even as much success as Exnid has had this season, because he's been much better than I think anyone gave him credit for, at least before the year, or thought he would be. Uh, but at the end of the day, like, does that, like you just mentioned, outweigh allowing Kismet to go back to his natural role and play with Pred, which is, obviously very reminiscent of Kismet's relationship with Hydra and how that ended with a world championship and even a Kismet MVP, even though he was not like the first SMG on his team, but he was so great in his role. And then he obviously can pop off and he can be the best SMG on a given map. And that led to an MVP and a world championship. And I think he's just been out of kind of like his comfort zone for so long. But, even with LAG last year and just like how horrible that roster was, how poorly constructed that team ended up being, and he just never really got out of the gate or out of the gate with that team. And now you have the Falcons, and he hasn't even been playing in his role. Exnid and Pred don't seem like they fit together super well, which, you have to make a move. And I just think if it comes down to it, it's like, who's better, Pred or Exnid? Pred. Okay, then we're going to pick Pred. We're going to bench Exnid. He can go down to one of the challengers teams, one of the many challengers teams that the Falcons have, and he might get another shot at the CDL at another point in time. And I think if in another roster, another version of this Falcons roster, he certainly could have his place. Like that, he's not like Snoopy or whatever, where it's like you definitely need to go get some seasoning and challengers. That's not really the case with Exnid. Exnid would honestly be an interesting Boston option if that were ever to come to fruition, because I mean that it seems like a better option than what they have currently. But yeah, I think this is a good move. I can't say that for a lot of other moves that we've seen or maybe potentially going to see in the CDL, but I think right now, if Pred were to stay in this roster, Kismet moves to a submachine gun, and you bring in QK, I think that is a worthwhile move that could actually end up with the Falcons, who have been desperately mediocre to this point, where they cannot get out of their own way. They cannot get out of the middle of the pack. I think this actually might move them from that middle of the pack into kind of right where Toronto ended up being, where there's like maybe fourth, like maybe you're kind of nipping at the heels of an LAT, depending, or maybe Paris, depending on how they do. But I think that like that fourth, fifth spot is super open for the Falcons to take, and I would love to see them make this move. And I think it could actually work out, which is not you can't say that about many of these roster changes. It's more just kind of moving, deck chairs around the Titanic. It just like you're trying to figure it out. You're never going to actually do anything with it. I think one of the most important ones that we haven't talked about, probably the most important one that we haven't talked about, is the Miami Heretics, because there's been some conflicting reports and rumors about this that reportedly, or I guess it was rumored previously, that it was going to be ReeaL in for Traixx, which is just incredibly interesting on the surface. Yeah. And then like subsequent reports and rumors have emerged that it's not as simple as that. It's not that Traixx is getting replaced, but it does seem like ReeaL is going to be a substitute for the Miami Heretics. And all of this, we can't mention without talking about all of the drama that went on this offseason with Miami and ReeaL. Miami came out very publicly and said that ReeaL broke a handshake agreement that he would re-sign with the Heretics and return, and basically the roster that they had last season that really overperformed expectations, they would be all coming back together for the 2026 season. They said that he broke that handshake agreement, and then he went to Toronto and he signed a new deal with Koi. That obviously seemed to lead to a lot of bad blood, and then ReeaL just did not play well with Toronto. He ends up getting released. I think he, if I remember correctly, asked for his release so he could. I think it was that, right? Didn't the owner say he asked to be released so he could like go to other teams or whatever and didn't have to be subject to a buyout? Either way, like he's a free agent. He's free to do whatever he wants, and it seems like he might be destined to return to Miami. How do you feel about this? Because it was probably one of the more like contentious parts of the offseason, maybe the most contentious part. And usually when that happens, like years have to go by before like everybody lets bygones be bygones. But it seems like here we are like less than a year removed, and it seems like he might be coming back.
I think the biggest thing in this situation is that this was from an organization standpoint and it wasn't based on the players. Like it always seemed like throughout all the drama and stuff with the ReeaL situation that it was never any bad blood between like Rancor and Super and Metals and them. So I think that's an important caveat here, but I just think the whole concept of ReeaL replacing Traixx absolutely blew my mind. Like whether that actually was going to be a thing or not in any regard is definitely worrying to me, just in the sense of like if it got to Zuma and started like getting around in these circles, it had to have at least been like in the conversation or potentially in play. And that has me worried about the team from a chemistry standpoint and what they like, how Traixx is fitting in outside of the server and all that, because I feel like Traixx has slowly been improving as this season has progressed and as he's gotten more reps with this team. So I was completely blindsided by this and did not see it coming. I feel like, especially now that it's being reported that ReeaL is going to be a sub spot, I feel like the potential change that could happen here would be ReeaL replacing Metals. I feel like that has just like slowly been what's happened with these Heretics guys is those like, Metals, Lucky, all of them previously, like they just slowly end up working their way out of the CDL and retiring and moving on to coaching or these other ventures. And by having ReeaL reportedly signed as a sub, you are potentially like safeguarding from that if you are Miami. Miami has historically always had these 5-man rosters over the recent years, and this was the one season where they seemingly didn't have that fifth player. Um, so I like the move if it is just ReeaL as a sub. I still think Metals has his moments in the CDL, but he is definitely the player who's the least consistent on Heretics, in my opinion. Like I feel like he can pop off here and there, but um, I I I think maybe this is a move for the future too, because it's not like
Yeah.
ReeaL was struggling individually. We got to be honest. When he was playing with Toronto earlier this year, so maybe they're just thinking ahead and they want ReeaL on the books, and potentially for next year he can be an option. Like I said, I don't even know, but very weird situation that it even like came out that it potentially could be ReeaL for Traixx, because that hasn't seemingly been the Miami way since Heretics returned to the CDL. The only other time we really saw that was when um Eric Boom like got his very brief opportunity in the CDL. And ironically, he was replaced by ReeaL, so it wouldn't have been the first time that like a rookie player was replaced by ReeaL on Miami, and it did work out for them that time. So I guess thinking about it out loud now, it's not the craziest thing. But I was blindsided by it and definitely did not expect it. So I'll be interested to see how this situation plays out for sure.
It does seem to be a pretty similar situation because, according to Ronnie Intel sources, he said that ReeaL received interest from multiple franchises, including the Vancouver Surge and Boston Breach, but visa complications made those options unfeasible at this time. He's currently back in Europe. ReeaL is competing with Project 7 and awaiting the completion of his visa process. The expectation is that he'll return stateside by the end of Stage 3, positioning him to join Miami's active rotation if needed later in the season. And of course, that's what happened with Miami and ReeaL the first time. That the reason that he got released by the Carolina Royal Ravens was because he couldn't get back into the country and his visa issues were very complicated. I believe it was like the Christmas break or something like that, like where he played a few matches and then they had the break in the CDL season, and then he wasn't able to come back. And then he, of course, like you said, he ends up replacing Eric Boom in that Heretics roster, and the rest is history. He turns into like a star player and kind of, I would say in a way, the crown jewel of Miami until this offseason where they have this messy breakup. So you could also kind of liken it to how Aluka signed with FaZe early in the year, and we talked about it. Like, if people mess up and the team isn't performing as well as expected, then it's fair to think that you're essentially putting a lot of those players on a countdown clock. And everybody knows that if you're not up to snuff by the time that ReeaL has his visa issues resolved, you might be the one to get cut and replaced by ReeaL. And I just don't see, especially with how Miami's performed on land, which might be a big determining factor. Like if they have another decent to strong major 3 qualifiers, but then, and I guess the minor will also play a part of this, but then they have like a disappointing major 3, I would be very, very, very surprised if ReeaL isn't in this roster in some shape or form, whether it is for Metals, whether it's for Traixx, for whoever, if he's not in the roster at the start of the Major 4 qualifiers. Like that would just be kind of shocking because they need something. They have been lacking in these land performances, which wasn't necessarily the case last year. They were able to actually have like pretty sustained runs at a few of the majors, and they just haven't been able to do that this season. I think that's really been hurting them, especially even just from like, the way we talk about them. We don't talk about them as like anywhere close to a threat to the top teams. Whereas last year, especially toward the end of the last season, we're like, yeah, they definitely could beat LAT. They could beat FaZe. They probably could beat Optic. They could beat any of the top teams, maybe not all in a row, maybe not in one single tournament, but they could probably be a top 4 team nonetheless. And so I would be pretty surprised if he's not in this roster later this season, especially if Miami doesn't improve down the stretch. That's probably it for about the CDL stuff. We did have some challengers, Capsidal and Cammy to Bush. I just talked about how Omit Brooklyn has like 2 players, and Cammy recently left Omit. Obviously, Capsule just got released by Vancouver. Very natural fit to return to the Bush. Yeah, they were pretty sad to see him go. What do you think about this move as certainly the top Bush fan in the Ego Chall podcast community?
The most interesting thing here is that Awakening is no longer on the Bush, and there were some talks in the conversation about like Awakening just not being like a fit for the Bush in terms of out of game stuff, because that's like Big Wake is Giga Wake in the server, but he's like a silent assassin. Like he's a very, he's not super outspoken or anything like that. And the Bush, you know for lack of a better term, they are a very entertaining team, and they are, they're into the content and all that stuff, and doing the videos and the vlogs, and when you got Awakening, like it's nothing against him. That's just who he is, or has seemingly been in his pro career. He's super good at the game, but he's pretty quiet and not as outspoken. So it's not a shocking move in that regard. The bigger shock, based on everything that's happened since these moves, though, not necessarily a shock, but the Fire situation. Fire is now in a position so I think it's because of like the pro-am for Major 3. Like these challengers teams have to get their rosters set to try and do like the qualifiers or whatever for the last pro-am spots at Major 3. And for someone like Fire and some of these other players who are in talks for the trials and stuff, Fire is seemingly betting everything on getting his shot with the Royal Ravens, because now he's not on the Bush, and if he doesn't get the spot with Carolina, he's just like, he doesn't have a team in the Pro League or in Challengers. So you can look at that in multiple ways. You can look at that as like Fire betting on himself, which is awesome to see, but it's also like a very risky move, because if it doesn't work out, then he's kind of screwed. But you can also see that as like extra motivation. Like he obviously has to know that's the situation he's in right now, and he's got to be like, I got to go 150% in these trials, and not leave any doubt in Carolina's minds that they need to pick me over everyone else, because I have everything to lose if it doesn't go my way. So I think that's an interesting wrinkle from a pure Bush perspective, though. Like you said, Capital returning makes a ton of sense, and I'm super happy for him. Cammy is going to be an interesting one. I do think Cammy kind of fits what they're doing, but obviously he's a UK player and stuff, so I think there's going to be some fun content opportunities and stuff, like having Jersey Jerry do content with Cammy and like try and guess like English stuff and all that would just be hilarious. And that's just one thing off the top of my mind. So I'm excited to see how it works out for Bush, but definitely on the Fire front, it kind of makes these trials with Carolina even more interesting.
This is kind of like a developing situation, but the meta might be actually changing for Black Ops 7. It's not confirmed by any means, and it's not set in stone by any means, but it appears that the Dravik is out. That seems like more and more clear as time goes on, but what actually is going to replace it seems up in the air. According to Crone, or the Intel CDL, he said that a current meta was being tested in scrims of the Kogat, SMG, MPC, SMG, and the Voyak AR, which would obviously be a massive change because we've just been using M15 and Dravik for the entire season to this point. But there are also people saying that Ghost of Hope, which I didn't know he was allowed to be on Twitter. I didn't know that was part of the contract, but he originally said it looks like we have a new SMG meta potentially for CDL ranked play soon, because CDL teams and challengers have started testing other SMGs and scrims. M15 is seemingly staying as the AR. And then he tweeted a day later, he said, hearing that the M15 might be getting GA'd. Kata Uncensored, they tweeted that the Voyak and Kogat had likely been GA'd by the pros, and that the NPC and M15 would be the meta. So that was all like within the span of like 12 hours essentially.
Yeah.
And we're still more than a week away from matches actually returning in the CDL. So we could see more changes or more reported changes over that week. what do you think will actually happen? And what do you think about like these developments that are seemingly happening at a very quick pace in the CDL?
Yeah, I don't know absolutely anything about those two guns that were being tried and then potentially G8 and the Kogat and the Voyak. I did mention Tremi. Let me go back and pull it up. So I asked him because I didn't the first tweet I saw didn't even list what the guns like were, an SMG or an AR. I obviously recognized the MPC. But I asked Tremi and I was like, the Voyak's got to be an AR, right? I think the Kogat was in the game the last time I played, but regardless, in Tremi said, yeah, the Voyak is all the kids use in pubs. I notice if they aren't using a swordfish or the M27, which I don't know if he means the swordfish or the M8, but I didn't even if the swordfish is in separately, I didn't even know that. And Tremi then said, I watched some bush scrims yesterday, and they tried all of them on the new maps, but M15s were still being used as the main AR. And then he was the one who told me earlier that Voyak and Kogat got G8 and it didn't last long, and they're testing the M15 and the MPC. So it seems to be in line with what is being discussed right now, is that it potentially could be M15 and the MPC, which I liked the MPC at the start of the game, if I remember correctly. Pretty sure the MPC is the last SMG that you get in the Black Ops 7 level progression, and I used my like permanent unlock on it at like right when the game released, because that's how I use those permanent unlock tokens in my head. Like if something isn't unlocked until level 55, I'm gonna use that because then I get the most value out of a permanent unlock, as opposed to just unlocking something that's like at level 10 when I could get to level 10 again pretty soon after prestiging. And I liked the NPC. I thought it played pretty well, especially in zombies, which is what I was playing mostly at the start. But like I said, I used that permanent unlock token on it, and in the limited pubs I was playing, I was using the NPC more than the Dravic at the very launch of the game, and I liked the NPC. So I'll be interested to see um, what happens from a meta perspective. I saw like there was one clip I saw of like it was on exposure, I believe, and it was Shotzi using the Kogat, and like he was on, those like solar panels that are near I wanted to say uplink, but I didn't. The overload goals, and then there's like that one hill where the tanks are or whatever. It's like a pretty long range gunfight. Shotzi was on the solar panels, and then a player was in like that middle area where the hard point is, and like people were like he was shooting at the guy and hitting his shots, but he didn't kill them. And people were like, "Oh my God, the Kogat sucks," all this yada yada. And I was like, "No, it's just the Kogat's actually an SMG, and you can't map someone with an SMG like that. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's just that's how it has worked this year because the Dravic's been insane." And I think that's part of the issue right now, is that seemingly, again, from the outside perspective, that the Dravic was just so good at killing people at any ranges that it's kind of like warped people's perception of what an SMG is supposed to be. And an SMG is supposed to be a close range gunfight. You
Yeah.
shouldn't be able to map someone with an SMG. Like that just defeats the whole purpose of it. So um not sure from the whole balancing and stuff. Like I said in recent episodes, couldn't even tell you last time I turned on my PlayStation and played COD. So I'm definitely not fully in the loop in any of that stuff. But based on my very very early playing of Black Ops 7 when it was first released, I did like the NPC. Definitely have no good way of gauging what it's like in comparison to the Dravic and stuff from a personal perspective, but uh just in turn like similar to what we said with the maps and that stuff last episode, like we just need a something different to change and something fresh. And I think if the M15 is going to stick around, and I would at the end of the day at least like to see one new gun, and if it is just the MPC instead of the Dravic, I guess I'll take that.
Yeah, the perfect solution would be to have two new guns, and so complete refresh of the meta, and then on the map front, the additional maps could change up how how series are played and how teams kind of react and practice. And I think that would just add a lot to the final few months of the season, where it's not just like kind of everybody refining their skills with the same guns and same maps, that they have to basically deal with a lot of change, especially during the Major 3 qualifiers, and then maybe start to kind of find their groove in the Major 4 qualifiers and Major 4, and then, in that 2-week period before champs. And I think that would make a lot of sense. We don't always get what we want. We don't often get what we want. So we'll see how things work out. This is still very much up in the air. There's no really solid meta right now, it seems, because I'm sure teams are just getting back to practicing on a consistent basis, and still teams are trialing and trying to figure out who their rosters are going to be this week. So I think a lot will probably change over the next 4 or 5 days before roster lock.
That is one thing I'll just throw out, and I literally just thought of it when you said it there, is it's kind of like, I don't know, I want to say counterintuitive, but I don't think it's like the perfect word to use in this instance. But basically what I'm thinking right now, and this is literally just a gut instant reaction because of what you just said, is it's kind of weird to think about all these teams are trialing players right now in a period where we don't even know like what the current meta is from a gun perspective. We have all these new maps coming in, and that just like that feels kind of like strange to think about, because you're trialing outside of like Kenny, because you're trialing Kenny based on pedigree and not recent stuff, right? A lot of these other guys besides Kenny, though, you were trialing based on their success in Black Ops 7 so far, or at least if you're not like solely focusing on what they've done in Challengers this year, you're like probably more so weighing that over what they've done historically, just because they're younger players in most cases. But it does seem strange that let's just use Fire as an example. Fire has been playing very well in Challengers, but that could be on a completely different meta and maps than what actually ends up being used in the CDL and what they're using in these potential trials as well. Like you could, just in theory here, you could trial any player with the Dravic, or who was using the Dravic all year. Now you're like, yeah, you can't use that Dravic. You got to go try a different gun, and now we got to see what you're capable of. And it could be the first time some of these guys are even touching that gun. Obviously that's like out of everyone's control, but that's a factor I wasn't even thinking about in this whole situation, to be honest.
That's why I think the trials really favor the most adaptable and flexible players, that they can, especially players that are actually can flex to AR and SMG, because you don't know, like maybe it could be a 3 AR meta, probably not going to be a 3 SMG meta. That just it doesn't happen very often anymore. But in the past, like that could happen where you have 3 SMGs on the map and only 1 AR. So being able to, because most teams have one solid AR and one solid SMG at the very least. So they need something in the middle typically. And like if you're able to adapt to whatever the new meta is, or what the meta is being tested currently, then that could actually have a major impact on you being successful and getting on a team. And I think that's very interesting. I think it's a great point. I don't know how the teams really weigh it, like if they are weighing like these individual performances, how much they're weighing more the communication and how their players get along, and like how well in terms of like the chemistry that they can build in these trials, how well they can do that. But yeah, it's worth saying. And I mean, it could be a reason why some of these teams still end up with quote unquote the wrong person at the end of the day, because these trials are naturally imperfect and they don't really map out how a team will play over even a qualifiers. Like these upcoming qualifiers will be like 4 or 5 weeks, including the minor. So like that's a little over a month that they have together. In the trials, you have like maybe a few days, and you don't really know how everybody's going to gel and how everybody's going to improve, or I guess regress, in that 4 or 5 week period. So it's something to keep an eye on, and we'll keep talking about it after we come back to make sure that we do get an update on the meta and see what is happening to start the Major 3 qualifiers. And then the last thing I really think is not even a Call of Duty thing necessarily, because it's a Valorant esports news, but so Riot announced yesterday morning that quote unquote everything is a tournament, and basically everything is like open qualifiers. It's like 4-team open qualifiers. You go to the international cups, like literally every single thing. It's no more league matches, which have been kind of dominating esports for so long at this point. Like, I don't know when that necessarily started. I know LCS, like Riot, has been doing league matches for years and years at this point. But the CDL did not used to be necessarily, or I guess the CDL has always been like this. But Call of Duty esports was not always a league match oriented esport. If you go back to Black Ops 2, everything was tournaments. Everything was, scrims online. You'd have these online cups, of course. You'd have like 360 icons, game battles, UMG, blah, 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 UGC. And then you'd have everybody meet up at MLG Dallas, at Champs, at MLG Anaheim, at UGC Niagara, UMG Chicago. And they would all meet up every few months for these big tournaments, these big open style tournaments. And it doesn't seem like Valorant is going to be like opening up the whole, they're not going to be as open as like we have 128 teams here and like the pro teams are the same as the amateur teams, but it does seem like they are embracing that kind of style, that no matter if it's online or if it's on LAN, whether it's to qualify for this big tournament or whether it's just like its own thing, everything is based in a tournament structure. And that has been a very popular idea in the CDL space and in COD esports. A lot of pro players or former pro players were kind of hyping this up, and it seemed like pretty favorable to this idea. I think I said it a few weeks ago that I would prefer things like this, where it's like even seeding, like it would make a lot more sense to seed these teams in the majors. It's like put them in another bracket and let them play each other, and then the top 4 teams are the top 4 seeds, and so on and so forth. I want to get your thoughts on this. Obviously, this is not League of Legends, but you are very in tune with a lot of what Riot's thinking is typically because of the LCS and how they treat the League of Legends esports. So what do you think about how they're structuring this upcoming season, or I guess next season, for the Valorant Champions Tour?
Yeah, I think from a very rudimentary perspective, in my experience with like my understanding of how Riot operates and what they do, they are very, very calculated in the decisions they make, and they do not often try to make these like wholesale changes without like strongly considering what all the possible outcomes could be. And even like recently with the LCS and stuff, they for 1 year pivoted from the LCS to the LTA, where they merged like the LATAM countries with the NA League of Legends League, and that just didn't work, and they completely cut it off, and that was a 1 year thing. Completely pivoted back to the LCS for this season, and um they've gone from there. So I think they have to be confident in this in terms of like a revenue standpoint and from a competitive standpoint, because that's one thing Riot we always talk about the Call of Duty stuff from a developer standpoint, like not even having competitive Call of Duty towards the top of their list of priorities, let alone at the very top. For Riot, it's always been a competitive game first, especially with League of Legends. Like it's a competitive game first. Um, and that's part of why it has been successful to the degree that it has been over these years. Um, I think just in general, I'm not going to pretend to fully understand everything from a Valorant perspective here, but the whole concept of just like everything is a tournament is definitely very appealing, and I think it would be interested to see how the CDL could incorporate something like this in the future if they ever decided to go down that route. I think like my instant gut reaction was that this isn't going to be something that could, in theory, I mean it technically could impact the CDL next year, but
Yeah.
my viewpoint is that it won't impact the CDL next year, but the CDL can look at how this works in Valorant in 2027 and use that to potentially formulate their own similar everything is attorney format for 2028 and beyond. So I think the way this Valorant system works, whether it succeeds or doesn't, could directly impact the future of the CDL. And that was the big overall big picture way of looking at it from my perspective, because I do think there's been a lot of talk about the whole online league matches and all that. I even saw Courage like responded to one of Clay's tweets, and it was something like, Courage said he got tired of casting Ardennes Forest CTF online 5 times a week or something like that, and it made me laugh because then I started thinking about that Clay video with the trees and Ardennes Forest and all that, and that was funny. But I think at the end of the day, there's definitely I always say this, at least there CDL could tomorrow come out and announce that they are doing this for the rest of the season and everything is a tournament format, and people would still find a reason to complain and still find something to bitch about. They're never going to please everybody. It's always it's a losing battle from that perspective. But I do think that the success or the failures of this Valorant system could directly impact the future of the CDL. It might not be the immediate future, it might not even be next year, but if the CDL still kicking beyond 2027, and in 2027 this Valorant stuff works very well for Riot, I would be shocked if the CDL doesn't try to at least somewhat integrate some form of this Valorant system into what the CDL is doing in 2028 and beyond.
This couldn't have come at a better time to affect change in the CDL, honestly, because like you said, we're right on the heels of the longest online qualifiers in CDL history. We had 11 matches for every single team. I believe it was over 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. This was a long time to be doing that, especially when sometimes we've had qualifiers that are like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. We're just about to have, I believe, like a 4-week qualifier period coming up, not including the online minor. But I think that is why this might be actually really effective. Just like this announcement, the outpouring of support that we've seen from Clayster, Zuma, Aches, and obviously Zuma is one of the biggest streamers in the COD esports space. Clayster, one of the best players of all time, a current coach in the CDL. Aches, he is Aches, so but he's obviously one of the most outspoken people. He has a major platform to kind of speak on these issues, and they're all in massive support in this format. I don't know if it will necessarily work the same way in the CDL, obviously, because Valorant is like a truly global esport. Like they have teams in Korea and Japan and Australia and Europe and North America and South America. Call of Duty, baby, is a North American sport almost exclusively. Of course, we have like an all Spanish team. We have like quite a few European players, mostly from the UK. And there are a few here and there, like Australian players and stuff. But like for the vast majority of the CDL's history or COD esports history, it has been predominantly North American. So it would not be identical to the way that Valorant is doing their system. But I personally have said, and I think this might be a good time to just kind of weave in what we think would be the better way or in our preferred way to do a season or to do even a stage. I know you don't like that term, but like the kind of the cycle of like a major or whatever the tournament that we're building to. I personally think the all tournament format is the way to go. Not necessarily this, but I miss the days of 2Ks and 5Ks personally. And I think that there's a way to weave those in, because what we have to take into account is that the CDL will not accept any proposal where they are losing out on time that they're streaming. Like the CDL is kind of at least 3 days a week. They're on YouTube and Twitch for 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours a day, from like 3 p.m. to like 8 p.m., 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. They're streaming those matches. And that is not something that can be taken away. We can't just like remove that aspect of the CDL because that's unrealistic. But what I would like to see is, instead of doing league matches from from Thursday to Sunday or Friday to Sunday, to do a tournament from Thursday to Sunday or Friday to Sunday, where it is essentially you can have all 12 CDL teams. I would prefer you also loop in some challengers teams as well, but I understand that that might not be realistic and it might not actually happen. But I think some kind of tournament, even if it is online and you get those complaints, and like you said, everybody will have complaints no matter what the solution is or whatever idea you come up with. But what I would like to see is that tournament, and kind of a 5K essentially, where you put all 12 teams in the bracket. You can stretch it out over 3 days, however you want to do that. I think it's just easier if you increase the number of teams, whether it's in the CDL or you include challengers teams, because then there's no shortage of matches on Friday, on Saturday, and on Sunday. So that's the way I would go. And then those tournament placings would lead to seeding points, or CDL points, and that would influence the seeding when you actually get to a tournament. I think if you did a tournament every single weekend, and if you had like 4 or 5 of those 5K like tournaments, and then they lead to a major, then that would be the way to go. I think I've said it before, it makes a lot of sense to have a major for every season that Black Ops 7 has. So like in season 1, which begins at the beginning of the game cycle, I think a kickoff tournament is like the only way to go. Like when any Call of Duty game is announced, or not announced, when it is released, then you have a tournament. You have esport is always connected to the game itself. And that kickoff tournament then influences the seeding for the very first online tournament. And then in each and every tournament, you can, I guess, switch up the tournament styles if you want. Like you could have some group play days, you could have like a single elimination, you could have double elimination, whatever the case may be, but you can always move it around. And then you lead up into the first major right before season 2 of Black Ops 7 begins, and then you kind of start the cycle all over again, and you keep doing that for the remainder of Black Ops 7, even if it goes until August, let's say, even goes till September. It's like the Call of Duty players don't need a 5-month off season. Like that's a ridiculous thing. They're not like out there, bashing their skulls together like football players or anything. Like it's okay if they only have like maybe 2 months off between seasons, and you get kind of like this full season structure, and it's actually based on what we're seeing in the actual game itself and the esport. That's my preferred way. It would obviously have to probably be fine-tuned to make sure that the schedule is the way that the CDL wants it, and how they want to advertise it to their business partners. But I believe that that's the best way, at least from my perspective, in doing doing a CDL season. How do you kind of, obviously you are a big fan, at least in theory, right, of 11 matches, so every team is playing every team. You don't have like a lopsided schedule where some teams might play FaZe, Optic, LAT, and Mates in their 5 or 6 matches, and then another team has like Boston, Carolina, Miami. Like they don't play the same kind of schedule. So what do you think, and is maybe your preferred way of the CDL operating their season schedule?
Yeah, I think if league play matches or online matches or whatever are to remain a part of the CDL, which seemingly is the case right now and in the short term, regardless of what's going on with the Valorant perspective and stuff, I definitely am a fan of the 11 of every team plays every other team. I just think that makes the most sense. It is the most fair. I do, admittedly, this past set of qualifiers definitely dragged on and definitely took a while. So I don't know if that really is the perfect system in terms of keeping interest and retaining viewership and all that. But from a pure competitive integrity standpoint, I definitely feel like that's because like we're gonna talk about it eventually coming up here. Like I know we briefly looked ahead at like what Cloud9 is playing, what teams they're playing for the Major 3 qualifiers, and it's like at least on paper the teams that are playing Cloud9 in the Major 3 qualifiers have somewhat of an advantage because it's not a free win, but it's like they have a very good chance on paper to get a victory there. And some of these other teams that don't play Cloud9 in the qualifiers, because of the way it works out, they don't have that same opportunity. So that's my finding a way to counter that is really why I like the like every team plays every other team sort of style. Um, I guess in terms of what kind of like what you were saying, like maybe it's a thing where like the beginning of the season, we've talked about these kickoff tournaments and stuff, and they happen in some games, and some games we get them super close to launch, and other games it takes a while to go. Maybe it's a thing where we got to do these online matches like right away, very early in the season. And you could even do a thing like where like, because they like that Christmas break, right? So like maybe it's a thing where we do like start of the year after the game launches, every team plays every other team twice in an online match. That's in theory 12 teams, that's 24 matches. That is a good basis for like doing like a seeding and stuff in terms of future tournaments. So I'm just spitballing this because I'm thinking of it literally on the spot here. You do something like that where every team plays the other team, that's 22 matches. You play them twice, so you get a good basis and a good sample size for what to expect for teams. Then you go into the holiday break and potentially give some teams, if they played 20 matches, if the team sucks, you have a chance to make a roster change there before the calendar flips to the next year. And then as soon as that calendar, like after Christmas and the holidays and the New Year, you immediately get into tournaments. And it doesn't matter, like I don't care what the tournaments look like you said, 2Ks, 5Ks, and all that. I do think it would be interesting to see how they may, like, it would have to be something similar to the minor that we will get to see during these major 3 cycles. And I think that could be a future bet. Like, if the minor tournament at the end of this year are like another talking point again, and people like them and stuff, that could influence what the CDL does going forward in terms of how often they happen and all that. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Um, but just like, yeah, like do online matches at the start of the year, do your holiday break, and after the holiday break, hit us with tournaments. Every weekend, it could be like a small single elim 1-round tournament, and then like 2 weekends later, you do some sort of double elim tournament that's got pool play and 4 challengers teams come in or something. I don't know how it would work out, but just something that it would have to bridge the scale that you're trying to balance, where you say like the CDO wants its product on these streams and stuff for X amount of hours every week. It has to, for whatever types of deals and sponsorships it has, yada yada. Um, that's what the CDL wants, and the fans want tournament action. They don't want these online matches. So they meet somewhere in the middle, do the online stuff at the start of the year. A lot of people really don't care about those beginning matches, especially before the holiday break and stuff. Like, it feels like, there's some initial excitement for the first few matches when it's literally the first matches of the year, first time you're getting to see some of these new teams play. But then after that, it's like people are tuning out basically until we get to LAN. And then once the LAN happens, you get a cycle of initial excitement again for LAN to be back, but then it goes right back to online matches.
Yeah.
And people tune out again. So I really don't know what the perfect answer is, but I really like, again, just came up with that in the heat of the moment there, but I kind of like that initial idea that I had of doing online matches at the start of the year, get them out of the way, do your holiday break, and then after that, just do all tournaments.
Yeah, I think that the biggest issue that the CDL faces, and a lot of esports, honestly, is that when you do these league matches, the league matches do not have the same climax as a tournament.
Yep.
The tournament, from if you start it, whether it's on Thursday or you start on Friday, no matter what, it is building. It is constantly building. You're constantly chopping off teams. You're constantly eliminating teams from your tournament, and you're getting closer and closer and closer to the grand finals, to the championship match. In league matches, of course, in theory, we are all moving toward the championship match, but on a week-to-week basis, like, there's no difference really between the first match on Friday and the last match on Sunday. They mean the exact same thing. And when that happens, the matches don't actually matter. It doesn't mean that every match is important. It means that none of those matches actually matter very much at all. And that's probably the biggest issue that the CDL faces, is that no matter if it's on December 11th on a Friday or if it's on April 18th on a Saturday, that those matches are equal. That should not happen. That is awful for the viewer, that 5 months can go on and basically nothing has really changed. Of course, like the seating implications mean the same regardless, but that's not how the actual viewer will feel. And we've talked about this before, like the matches that happen in the major four qualifiers are always more exciting than any of the other previous qualifying matches, because we know exactly what a team needs to do to make sure they get to champs, whether they get a top 4 seed, whether they get the number 1 overall seed, whether they literally don't make it to champs. That's literally the only reason that those matches even matter even a little bit more than everything else. But if you have something that is, I mean, a part of this would also be in just like limiting the number of teams that make it to champs, because like if you have, say, only 6 teams make it to champs rather than 8 teams, then it makes every match more important. If you had 4 teams make it to champs instead of 8 teams, it makes it even more important than that. So that's where I'm kind of going with that, is like tournaments, even if they're like on a week-to-week basis and they don't mean nearly as much as the majors, which they never will. Like that's never going to happen. We can't ever replicate that on a week-to-week basis. But what can happen is that your week of matches or your week of action will actually culminate on Sunday. Because sometimes you have phase and optic play on Friday or play on Saturday. That's the culmination of the week, most likely. That's probably going to be the peak in terms of viewership and fan interest and all that. But there's a chance that even if phase and optic were to play early in a tournament, that the grand finals might still be the peak viewership, because people are like, well, I kind of want to see like who wins this tournament. I've been so invested for 3 days that I want to see on Sunday who actually wins this weekly tournament. So that's why I would advocate. I've always said, like, I've literally for years now said kickoff tournament, like literally opening weekend, launch weekend, big tournament. Whether it's online, on land, I don't really give a shit at this point. I'm just saying, put it out there. Like, there are always these weekend tournaments, like the midnight tourneys that teams and obviously players play when like Black Ops 7 comes out. But if the CDL can capitalize on that, and I think we mentioned it when the season started, because we had those preseason tournaments. I said like it would be kind of nice to do like an S&D tournament like on launch day or launch night, and then you have like some kind of other tournament on Saturday, and then you have like this big blow off like actual team CDL tournament on Sunday, because then everybody can like kind of gather around and like you bring your community together. So I would prefer the tournaments to just be every week, or every week is probably the only way to go about it, and then you have the majors that you are kind of building to at the end of the season, and then you obviously get champs. I think also just pulling in challengers players and challengers teams would also help, because it would add some variety. It would also obviously give those challengers players some much needed exposure when like nobody watches those matches otherwise. But if they're playing CDL teams, as we see with the Pro-Am events, that's the best way to get your name out there for a challengers player or a challengers team. So that's where I would go. I don't know what the CDL is going to do. Maybe this is all kind of like a moot point, because they're not going to change even a little bit. Like they're so good with like the seeding matches, and we always call them qualifying matches because that's what they call them. But like for the vast majority of the CDL, qualifying matches have been like seeding matches. And that's not nearly as exciting when it's just like, well, everybody gets to the tournament anyway. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So,
qualifying matches this last major at least.
Yeah, that was one of the first times that they've done that. Like, I guess they're qualifying matches for champs technically, but that's not really how people think about those things. I think that about does it. This was about an hour and a half. Of course, we always stretch at 90 minutes, it seems, but we appreciate all the love and support that we've been seeing. Obviously, we're close to 300 subscribers on YouTube. If you would like to watch these live streams instead of just listening or watching the podcast afterwards, then you can watch them on YouTube, subscribe, and you should get a notification. I think Bink gets like a notification every time we go live on YouTube, which wasn't always the case. But you can also follow us on Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. And if you are kind of like, I think if you have to check a box, but you should get like an email anytime that we're live. So that would give you an idea of when you can watch the stream. And you can also go to Bink's Twitch as well, and you can follow and subscribe, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Again, we're on YouTube, we're on Twitch, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. We're on most, if not all, of the podcasting platforms at this point. Next show, we will not be doing a weekend show, so no Sunday show from us because I'll be out of town, but should be back for next Wednesday. Obviously, the CDL is coming back next week. Next Friday is the beginning of the Major 3 qualifiers, so of course we'll be breaking down all of those matches and giving our predictions. I believe I didn't say follow us on Twitter. You can follow Bink on Twitter, @jbink with 2Ks, @Preston Byers, the podcasters, @Ego Chall Podcast. And again, we'll be back next week to talk about hopefully a lot of confirmations as well in terms of rosters. We've gotten a lot of rumors, a lot of reports, a lot of trials, the most trials that I've seen in CDL history at this point. Hopefully we get some resolution on that and we can get some confirmations as well before we do our next show. I believe that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Like Preston said, we'll have to wait and see. We do want to do power rankings before the next set of qualifiers start, but that'll be a little weird if, we're not able to do power rankings because teams aren't officially set in stone by the time we go live. But hopefully, in a perfect world, all the teams are announced before the next time we go live and we are able to do power rankings. But obviously, that is never the case on the Ego Chall podcast. So we'll have to wait and see how everything works out. But yeah, things are kicking into gear again. A little bit of a break, but we should have matches back here very soon, and we'll be in the swing of things as usual. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode and all the recent shows. Been a blast, and we had some good talks today, so I think it went pretty well. But yeah, appreciate all the support. Thank you guys as always, and remember to send the chow.